Do you ever deceive yourself? Do you even know? Can you think of a time recently where maybe you thought something to be true of yourself or your life that was called into question by a personal situation, crisis, trial? Today, we're going to examine the dangers of self-deception. But what exactly is self-deceit? So the dictionary defines it as the act or an instance of deceiving oneself or the state of being deceived by oneself. Saint Germain says it is the occurrence of curtains and shadows that are dropped all around us by our acts. In volume 8, number 45, he says, it is much easier to justify one's being simply by pulling the wool over one's eyes, so to speak, whereas to take corrective measures within the framework of identity requires not only energy and foresight, but also dedication and holy prayer. We use a lot of expressions in life to talk about self-deception. For example, he keeps telling himself the same old lie, or she rejects the truth, even though she is clear that she recognizes it, or he intentionally misleads himself. He doesn't know because he doesn't want to know, or she deliberately closes her eyes to the evidence. And while some of the ways we deceive ourselves may seem morally innocuous, like when we consider ourselves to be more intelligent or adept at certain skills than maybe we really are, it can also look a lot more sinister, like when we use self-deception to rationalize unethical behavior or deny our complicity in wrongful acts or minimize our responsibility for one's suffering, for someone else's suffering. And in doing so, we essentially invent a reality in which we're morally blameless. But why? To protect our egos? To avoid change? Psychologists consider self-deception to be a ubiquitous phenomenon and view virtually all humans as constantly hiding the truth from themselves. And because of the universal phenomenon of self-deception in human experience, we rarely accept what people say about themselves at face value. Not because we think they're insincere, but because we know that most people inherently suffer from sincere confusion and delusion when it comes to their own self-awareness and understanding. Self-deception is related to a wide variety of phenomena, such as irrationality, wishful thinking, delusions, imperfect memory, ignorance, avoidance, hypocrisy, maintenance of self-respect, and false belief. And for this reason, a lot of existentialists have often viewed self-deception as the primary means to avoid self-awareness. While theologians throughout history have noted the significance of self-deception and its impact on immoral behavior and sin. In the Christian tradition, self-deception has often been viewed as a division of the will. So our desire to maintain a separate egotistical will apart from God's will is what alienates us from reality and God, or God reality. It's also what led to the fall. Self-deception can lead to framing decisions that either eliminate unethical characterizations or distort them into positive ones. So in this way, it often leads us to and justifies wrongdoing. In fact, the very nature of sin is deceptive in that its goal is to obstruct knowledge of itself. So when we love something or someone, including ourselves, more than we love the truth, we have a clear motive for self-deception. And that's why it's not surprising that sin is intimately linked to self-deception. Just as sin turns away from God, self-deception turns away from the truth. According to Pascal, the greatest threat to moral life is neither ignorance of the law or moral weakness, but self-deception. Because sin or moral wrongdoing is usually a product of self-deceptive moral reasoning, in which one recognizes some course of action to be immoral, but manages to persuade oneself that it's actually moral. And similar connections between sin and self-deception appear throughout the Bible. So John 1:8 says, if we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Proverbs 4:19 says, but the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. And James 1, as we heard earlier, also warns against the danger of self-deception. For example, verse 22 states, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. So we can see that there's a fine line here between self-deception and deceiving others, which may not actually be that different in the end, if at all. And there's also a fine line between self-deception and blaming or judging others, but we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. So let's first explore this connection between self-deceit and deceiving others. An article on the Scientific American also called this into question. It's entitled, "We Deceive Ourselves to Better Deceive Others." People mislead themselves all day long, it says. We tell ourselves we're smarter and better looking than our friends, that our political party can do no wrong, that we're too busy to help a colleague. In 1976, in the foreword to Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene, the biologist Robert Trivers floated an explanation for such self-serving biases. He said, we dupe ourselves in order to deceive others, creating social advantage. And nearly 4 decades later, Trivers and his colleagues published the first research supporting this idea. Psychologists have identified several ways of fooling ourselves. So biased information gathering, biased reasoning, biased recollections, and then new research focused on that first one, the way that we seek information that supports what we want to believe and avoid that which does not. What's so interesting here is that we seem to intuitively understand that if we can get ourselves to believe something first, then we're going to be more effective at getting others to believe it, says William von Hippel, a psychologist at the University of Queensland who co-authored the study. And he said, so we process information in a biased fashion, we convince ourselves, and then we can convince others. Saint Germain has a lot more wisdom to offer about self-deceit and the deception of others, as well as this connection between self-deception and blaming or judging others. In volume 7, number 6, he says, there is a state of dissatisfaction in which men assess their own progress or lack of it, and by dishonesty and self, or self-deceit, are unwilling to admit to their own role in fashioning their weaknesses. Therefore, they strive to transfer responsibility and assign blame to others as the causes of their own failures or lack of progress. This is the prime cause of personal stagnation. In volume 3, number 3, he also says that self-deception is one of the greatest stumbling blocks to freedom. The greatest enemy of freedom, you see, often arises in one's own thinking and feeling world because of past negative momentums, past mistakes of thought and feeling, and also sometimes by reason of unrealized aspirations, which, because they're not yet externalized, lead to some feelings of futility and at times feelings of helplessness, which seem to form a spiritual vacuum, during which time the individual tends to be extremely self-critical and may then vacillate from reason and truth to a mood whereby the onus of self-criticism is transferred to another life stream in the vain human habit of avoiding the admission of personal failure. Dear ones, no one seems to enjoy admitting to failure, but such admission can be a catharsis of the highest type. For failure is never permanent if that one will go on toward oncoming and overcoming. I failed many times in small ways before my ascension, and when embodied as recently as Francis Bacon, it was reported that I was always just one jump ahead of my creditors. This does not mean that I approve of any injustice to any part of life, for I do not, nor does any ascended being. But imperfection ought not to judge the lot of any other part of life, for the simple reason that it is impossible for any human consciousness, while still unascended and itself imperfect, to know or cognize with absolute certainty the full cosmic law of another's being without our assistance. And again, in volume 60, number 9, Saint Germain says, make these divine qualities your own by practicing no self-deceit or attempting to deceive others, and observe how the crystal clear vision of eternity is imparted unto you. Whenever men seek to deceive, whether they attempt to practice it upon themselves or another, there is always the occurrence of curtains and shadows that are dropped all around them by their acts. And if they knew what takes place when they, as individuals, practice to lay a snare for their brothers, they would never do it. For everyone who lays a snare for his brother has laid a trap for himself, into which he will one day fall. And the fall of those who have plotted the downfall of others shall far exceed the fall of those innocent ones who may perform some innocent act that is still wrong. And while we admit that individuals in ignorance have often disobeyed the law and suffered the penalty, it is a lighter penalty by far than the penalty for individuals who have consciously permitted their mind and being to be used for the vilification of themselves or of their fellow men. Men, in seeking justice, have ever so frequently denied to themselves or to others the very justice which they have sought. This they have done unwittingly and by reason of human density. It is always human nature that one individual, while performing the same inequitable act that another is performing, will point the finger of scorn at the other individual and say, behold, how he has fallen. Well, let me tell you, beloved ones, it has never been the intention of God Almighty that any upon this planet should fall or stoop to deface or to defame the holy name of God, which bids them arise and receive from God light. And with light called them forth, as it were, from the void of non-being to the realm of being, and they declared in adoration of their own holy Christ self and mighty I am presence, lo, I am come. Those individuals step forth from the void of non-being then to the realm of being and entered upon the screen of life. Various occurrences have taken place in the history of each individual life stream whereby these life streams have experienced pain, despair, grief, confusion, heartache, and shadow. None of this has been our will. None of this is the holy will of God. None of this is found in the heart of true freedom. And therefore, bear well in mind that your purpose here is to exalt mankind and to debase none. Let no thought, no idea, no concept that is unhallowed enter your minds. If it comes to your doorstep, do not bid it welcome. Shun it, avoid it, cast it out as an unwanted guest. And you shall find that we shall tread here. You shall find that the holy hierarchy of heaven shall make this our home. We shall abide here in the spirit of light, illumination, and love that passes forth from our hearts into yours will become a beacon through the night of human existence, bidding all welcome to the home of the infinite one who abides within their hearts, makes known to them the fullness of the truth about themselves. This cuts them free and imparts to them the wisdom of the ages, whereby the Christ of old who walked among men were able to perform services of light without parallel. Ladies and gentlemen, I say to you, there is none so great in the past, spiritually speaking, that you cannot emulate them and follow in their footsteps. They deem it no desecration to have your heel and toe rest in the footprints upon the sands of life, which they have made. They deem it an honor to have you follow in their footsteps. And we bid you come. Recognizing and correcting self-deception is difficult, but we can take the first step by acknowledging its pervasive and universal presence. And then the second step is to open ourselves up to self-examination, questioning, because at the core of self-deception is the self-deceiver's failure to honestly and earnestly self-reflect. We need to question the justifications that we concoct in order to rationalize our actions. And yes, facing the truth is often painful, but in order to avoid self-deception, we have to love the truth more than we love ourselves. Just to add a little bit of humor here to illustrate this point, for anyone who's seen the comedy What About Bob? There's a scene in the movie played by Bob, who's by Bob played by Bill Murray, and he's in the psychiatrist's office. And then the psychiatrist, if you've seen it, is played by Richard Dreyfuss. Richard Dreyfuss asks Bob, "Are you married?" He says, "I'm divorced." He says, "Would you like to talk about that?" Bob says, "There are two types of people in this world, those who like Neil Diamond and those who don't. My ex-wife loves him." And the psychiatrist says, "I see. So what you're saying is that even though you have an almost paralyzed multiphobic personality that's in a constant state of panic, your wife did not leave you, but you left her because she liked Neil Diamond." Bob says, "You're saying that maybe I didn't leave her because she likes Neil Diamond, but maybe she left me?" And then he goes into sort of a self-awareness overload, and it's very painful for him. I promise the movie is funny, even though that's it's a little bit of a rough scene. But as Greg Esholth puts it, self-deception occurs whenever we manage our own beliefs without an eye on making progress toward the truth. It is most likely to occur when we have strong emotional attachments to belief on some topic. When we have no attachments, the general desire to believe what's true is more likely to guide our inquiry. And undeceiving ourselves obviously means accepting responsibility. So we need to recognize our tendency to select the evidence that best suits us and commit ourselves to paying attention to all the available evidence in search of the truth, no matter where it leads us. When we want to believe something because it serves our self-interest, we tend to manage our attention and allow into our minds only the things that will support our desired belief. If the evidence cannot be avoided, then we direct critical attention to it, not to learn from it, but to creatively discount it. So avoiding self-deception means forcing ourselves to pay attention to this unwelcome evidence with the willingness to give up our cherished beliefs, no matter how painful it could be. But before you start to beat yourselves up about the places and spaces where maybe you're deceiving yourself, just remember that God often uses trials, as Saint Germain pointed out, to bring us out of our self-deception and realign with God reality. As C.S. Lewis puts it, pain is often God's megaphone to get our attention. And unfortunately, the typical human response to pain is diversion, because diversion serves to distract our attention from our immorality and our failures and realities that are difficult to face. And this diversion is essentially an attempt to escape the reality. But these trials and this pain are actually ways to expose the self-deception. They're an integral part of the path. And the means by which self-deception is thwarted and self-knowledge is gained. These kinds of trials force us to face the reality without going through this diversion, and they force us to choose between the love of God and the love of self, which ultimately reveals the true inclination of our will, and thus serves as the test of the genuineness of our professed faith. So we can see that diligent effort to gain self-awareness is vitally important to preventing self-deception and ultimately a key to securing our freedom from unreality. And therefore, as Saint Germain says, those individuals who desire to find their true freedom will recognize that their true freedom is ever within themselves. They will recognize that they have but to sound the chord of destiny, which cuts them free from the elements of human creation, and the pure tones of holy love, sounding within the precincts of the sacred temple of being, will declare unto them in all of the fullness of the light. Now, obviously, self-reflection is very important, as is holy prayer. And so what I'd like to do today is conclude the message by calling upon Archangel Michael to come forward and to help us in this moment, to cut us loose and set us free from any and all self-deception that may be keeping us from realizing and actualizing God reality in our lives. So I'm going to be reading from chapter 12 of the Chila on the Path. But what I'd love to do is welcome you to close your eyes and just meditate on these words in your heart and visualize in your mind's eye Archangel Michael coming forward with this beautiful blue and coming from the heavens to sever all dissonant chords that might be in you now, so that your vessel can sound the true chord of your destiny as a God-free being. Take a moment just to center in your hearts. And imagine now being the recipient of Archangel Michael coming to stand in front of you with his sword and cut all of those dissonant chords from you, that you can just stand free in the light of God. Chelas who would become defenders of the faith. And what of Michael, Prince of the Archangels, known as the defender of the faith? Michael, the name rings across the heavens like the resounding of the Liberty Bell. And the soul caught in the briars and brambles of astral configurations hears the cry of deliverance. Hail, Michael, Archangel of the Lord, radiantly arrayed in blue-white lightning and the yellow diamonds of illumined action that crown this sun of light with victory. The dawn cometh, and over the hills there can be seen in the early light the silhouettes of the hosts of the Lord. Legions of Archangel Michael and their shields reflecting a sword of white fire, their swords of living flame drawn in tribute to the Mother. Swords formed of the sacred word which they intone, fired out of the vows of their love for the living God. They are joined by the 12 legions of angels who gather at the command of the faithful and true, who also wield the sword of Christ, focus of faith, hope, and charity. Chelas on the treadmill of life, yoked to the oxen of a mechanized torus substance by the lines of your own karma, look up. The deliverers of mankind are at hand. And Michael, Prince of the Archangels, leads the archangels and their legions in defense of the Christ consciousness. For God has ordained the evolution of the light through the infant humanity, as that humanity reaches up to be the full expression of the 7 rays of Christed awareness. Chelas of the sacred fire in this hour of compelling victory, when victory's light surges from within and demands an outlet for the flow of love, I say respond to the call from within. Respond to the mandate of the inner law of your being to be the fullness of the Christ, God victorious, love enthroned, crowning king and queen, while Father, Mother, God, ensconced in living flame, cradle the Christ child of their heart's oneness. And the fusion of that fire is for the mastery of the Christ consciousness in one of these 7 rays. This day I say, choose the path of your appointing and of your anointing, apply to the inner law of your being, and affirm God reality as the cloven tongues of the Holy Spirit converge within you for the march to the summit of life's victory. You have heard of the Chohans of the rays. Now I say, invoke the momentum of the 7 archangels to amplify in your soul and in your desiring to be whole the feelings of God, which compel the entire consciousness into conformity with the geometry of selfhood. The 7 archangels wield the power, the wisdom, and the love of infinity, of a cosmos yet to be born within you, as microcosmic, macrocosmic energies converge to become the warp and woof of the creative life force. Now expand the cup of consciousness to contain the archangel of your ray. If you serve the will of God, then on the blue ray, the first ray of the morning light, you define the azure of his holiness. The one who stands before the altar of the Lord, the adoring and the adored, releases into the consciousness of the archangel of the first ray, in sacred ritual, a sphere of the will of God, a disk of flaming blue, a core of sapphire yawn. Into his heart, the great archangel absorbs an atom of energy, a globule of light, and rising from the altar of the Lord, he goes forth into cosmos to release the cycles of God's faith, the will to be, the courage to live victoriously, the honor of the law of life itself, and the energy to sustain a cosmic pulse. And this blue fire flowing, received into the chalice of the mother, is the blueprint of every form of life, the divine direction for fulfillment, the network of a cosmos and the egg and the eye, and all the archangels and the seraphim and the cherubim bow before the radiant wonder of the world, Archangel Michael, standing in the center of the sun, now become a sunlit sphere of blue, haloed with white, yellow brilliance as the diamond shining mind of God exalts the warrior, tried and true. Chelas who would become aflame with faith, devotees of the will of God who would become more of self as the selfhood of his will, look up and behold the captain of the Lord's hosts, the great exemplar of your faith and your ray, and now, by invocation to your own I am God presence, submit by free will edict of your souls all doubt and fear and every hesitation, all resistance to action that formulates the human question, and factors of disobedience to the word of the Logos. Submit them all to the conqueror. He, by the magnet of his love, takes into his heart fires in response to the fiats of the chelas, all substance of negativity and the void of relativity. As these energies cycle through the blue diamond on his heart's altar, the flaming sphere of blue is returned to you and you and you. This Archangel Michael has done as a mighty work of the Lord for peoples and nations and continents and worlds. Carrying the banner of the cosmic virgin, he stands and has stood down through the ages to defend the children of the mother against the dragon Tiamat and her seed. Now then, heed our call and heed his sacrifice. For this Holy One of God stands before you. And as you read, every chela of the sacred fire receives the visitation of the electronic presence of Michael, the Archangel. Won't you receive him in grace, in honor, and in thanksgiving? Won't you bid him enter the citadel of your being and offer him a cup of light, a cup of goodwill, while your Christ self offers unto him the gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh, let your soul not tarry in the shadows, but let it come forth and present also upon the altar of his flaming selfhood all hopelessness, faithlessness, acts of wanton selfishness, and every careless deed. Allow the flaming one to assume the substance of your sin. Allow him to exchange it for the energies of his will to win. He will take unto himself that substance misqualified and transmute it into light, shining light, brilliant victory fastened in the mind of God. And so you lay the coals of a dying world of selfhood upon the altar of the archangel, and you watch as before your very eyes they are transformed into the diamond of your crystallized Christ identity. This is the alchemy of the first ray. This is the movement of a mighty ocean that is the power of the will of God to suddenly be still and to become the drop of individuality. I shall return to pursue our course of meditation in the mantle of the seven archangels, who even now are knocking at the door of consciousness. Moria. Dear beloved Saint Germain, we thank you so much for your teaching today. We ask that you would fill us with that flame of freedom, and help us transmute the coals of the dying world of selfhood into that diamond shining light of God reality. We ask for you to hold our hand and lead us to God victory this day and always. Let it be done. It is done. It is finished. Amen.